thing about Mythic Plus, dudes, is that it's never-ending content, right? Like, that's what you want in your gaming, is you want to be able to play it all the time. And the problem with the FF ones is they're too easy. So you do, like, your expert dungeon, but it's not hard. So whatever they're going to come out with for this Criterion thing, it's got to be, like, really hard, or just no one's going to be interested in it. Like, what's it? Ladies and gentlemen, we're here to talk about arse. Yes, we're going to talk about some delicious, crispy, very hard and very chewy arse. The Criterion Dungeons, a subterranean something, the abbreviation is arse, that we've been into. And their first step of Final Fantasy XIV to jump into the idea of very, very hard four-man content, which is their dungeon content. Obviously, a lot of Westerners have come over to Final Fantasy XIV, especially during the Shadowlands of World of Warcraft. They're there, and they're missing some of their toys that they had access to in World of Warcraft. One of them being Mythic Plus, which is that they could dungeon with their friends. With just a couple of friends, they could get into some dungeons, and they could progress as much as they wanted without having to step into a much more committal schedule style that is with endgame raiding. And you'll find that in Final Fantasy XIV as well. Savage raiding, generally, unless you're doing some group finder specific stuff, will have statics that are organized, setting times, doing all those kinds of things. And people are asking, like, hey, can we maybe get some dungeon content that's a bit more difficult, that can fill that niche, that scratch that itch that we've been looking for since we left World of Warcraft? And Squeenix replied, okay, we'll give this a go. And this is what they produced with these Criterion Dungeons that came with 3 modes. The first mode being entirely for the casuals, super fun. Did a video on that a while ago where we went around, we think we got world first on that, and if not pretty close, of multiple different endings, 12 different endings entirely, that you had to look for little things to change what would occur, find little clues, read texts, and uncover different pathways through those dungeons. Then in the middle was the Criterion Dungeon, which is extremely hard. This was my first step into something equivalent of Savage raiding. I have to trust the people that I did this with, who are Savage raiders. They, you know, some of them have cleared the current Savage tier, some of them are still working on the very last boss, but saying easily, like, certainly the last boss we're going to talk about was up there with past and difficulty of, say, P7S. So very, very difficult content. This is my first step in there. You might be surprised, after a year of playing FF14, I haven't done the Savage raiding yet. I've done all the extremes, all minimum item level, all no echo, all completely blind, super fun. But in January, I'm letting you know now, me and Jeeth, who you might remember from Echo's World of Warcraft raiding team, is now playing FF14. We will be teaming up, forming a union, and we will be starting with the Realm Reborn Savages. I have such a great fascination with how content, certainly in MMOs, is developed over time, how it's iterated on, what mistakes were made, how they're going to fix it, and we're going to be starting with the Realm Reborn Savages, the Coils of Bahamut, in January. So something to look forward to, and we'll definitely do a video on that. In the middle ground, then, we have the Criterion Dungeon, which I just said is very hard, and then above that is the Savage version. And the Savage version of these dungeons, of this dungeon, comes with no resurrection possible, no ground markers, so you have to read everything that's going on and understand that mechanic in order to deal with it. It's much more HP, does way, way more damage, and has a very strict time limit that you have to beat it on. And it's not a case of like Mythic Plus, where if you go over the time, then it doesn't matter, you just kind of get less rewards or a depleted keystone. In Final Fantasy XIV's version, if you go past their time limits, everything kind of enrages and smashes you to pieces. So you have a very strict time limit to jump into. One cool thing about this then is iteration. One thing that absolutely Squeenix is known for, and Yoshi P's team, is they are desperate for feedback on how to change things. They're not going to abandon this content by any means. They want to look to what worked, what didn't work, and then move it forward. And that's what we're going to be looking at today, because there's definitely lessons that they can learn from World of Warcraft here, which will help guide them in what might be the correct way to go. It's not my my saying it's correct. It's just what's worked after 15 years of messing around with dungeons that WoW's done to get to where it is today. Let's talk about the dungeon itself then. The first boss, the rat, Silkie. I did this, to be clear, completely blind. Didn't watch any videos on it, didn't see anybody do it, didn't watch any streamers trying it, went in completely unknown with 3 people who are also going in completely blind to see what was going on. One of our players did finish the dungeon because I was in America to visit the Blizzard campus for a week. They did it with a different group, but kept completely silent and also, as it turned out, did the fight in a very different way. One of the wonderful things about doing blind progression in FF14, it's easily my favorite thing to do, is that you often come up with things in a different way. The way you tackle dungeons can be in a different way. You may not know, especially when the combined minds of the internet start throwing opinions and ideas at things, they tend to come up with what's known as brain dead strats, where like this very complicated mechanic actually has a really simple way of dealing with it, where you don't have to struggle with it so much. And struggle we did. Overall, this represents probably four days of progress of about 4 hours a piece. Somewhere around there, with the last boss taking the absolute majority there. I didn't record the amount of pulls we did, but I would guess it was somewhere between 120, 150, something like that. Obviously, very quick pulls. You can die very quickly in this fight. A big mistake we made here was not reviewing our VODs. Obviously, we're not using any logs or anything like that to track what killed us. So when we got to a mechanic that we didn't understand, our learning was based on getting back to there and trying different things, different ideas, which definitely racked up the pull count instead of going back and being like, oh, we just faced this mechanic. How does it work? Go through it frame by frame and you're like, ah, there's the solution. We didn't do any of that. We went through it time and time again, trying different things, theory crafting ideas to see what eventually would work. I have to say, I adored this. I had so much fun. Honestly, I thought there was an expectation that I would get frustrated by this content by that point.
Hi Mike, Stripe here, thanks for the good wishes on day SR. Hope you enjoy being back in Mythic, plus you will do amazing.
Is that actually Scribe?
You, it's the rat. I have transcended and made my way to WoW. You can't run,
kill the bush yesterday.
You can't hide. I will find you and I will rat jam you.
I didn't feel that at all. I think a benefit of that was that I was playing healer and DPSing it. I think I may have started to get a little bored of some of these things, but honestly, the mechanics and the fact that the boss kept throwing new things at us was really kept me engaged every step of the way, because there was a new puzzle to solve every bit of progress. Is like, okay, now we've got a new puzzle to solve, all the way to the very end where we saw a mechanic that we didn't know about that almost killed us and nearly cost us the kill, but thankfully we'd got the boss low enough to manage to finish it off. I then found out later you don't even have to bother with that mechanic, but that's neither here nor there. So first boss Silkie was great. Everything was telegraphed pretty well. And I think that's so important with a game that doesn't use boss mods, is to make sure everything is telegraphed really nicely. There were very few things in the room, so that meant that you could puzzle it out pretty quickly. I think this only took us maybe a couple of hours to pull and kill. Was not a big deal at all. This was really just a nice introduction, a nice warm-up to what was going on. Never had any confusion about any of the mechanics here, really. Once we sussed it out, I think the most difficult thing we dealt with was how to survive positioning all the orbs with Silkie in the middle as to exactly how to do that. As with all FF14 things, once you kind of crack the code, is that these will go into cardinal, those would go cardinal directions, and the boss is here. We kind of came down to a simple philosophy as, do we make the middle safe? Or do we make the outside safe? That was it. And based on that, you can just individually decide what you want to do with your thing to make that true. So if you get targeted with something that's going to blow up in all cardinal directions, I need it to not hit the middle. Simple enough. Or if you need, I need to go to the outside. Okay, I make it so the outside doesn't get cleaved. Simple as that, and everybody dealt with their own thing, and that worked for us. I think that we got from wiping every single time in that phase to being 100% consistent all the way through it, and not hoping for the god pull. So Silkie, very cool. Onwards to the robot. This was not too bad either. I think our most difficult thing to deal with here, if I really think about it, was actually the soaking of meteor towers while being spread out. And even that wasn't particularly difficult. You have the whole room being bombed to pieces. You have everybody running around. And then you have to position yourselves in a very certain way in this giant room in order to make sure nobody overlaps. How big are the AoEs that are going off, which cleave everybody? All that kind of stuff was about the most difficult thing we dealt with. Other than finding the set positions for when they were going to cleave and create safe zones, other than that, it got very simple, and The only thing that's wiped us here was getting lazy or being slightly out of position on one thing, which would just kill you on this fight. But overall, I don't think this fight took us too long either. We had a few pulls at it after Silkie, and then we killed it very quickly on our next progress into there. So day 2, day 1 was Silkie, dead, couple of pulls on the robot. Then into the second day, killed the robot relatively quickly, and then onto the next boss, which is, of the 3 bosses in this dungeon, was so much more difficult. If I don't see another teleporter again for a good long while, I'm going to be happy. Because this fight is long, and it's hard. This is hard, at least for me right now, who's not got that back wealth of history I have with World of Warcraft, where I can, see it like the Matrix and kind of understand the mechanic instantly. That's why I do the casting for it. In this one, I was like, okay, there's a ton of things here I haven't dealt with, especially rotating teleporters that also pick out certain safe zones. And I'm glad to say I wasn't the only one. I was certainly the one who was doing the most learning here, but there was some very complex stuff going on here. Going through this fight, the last fight, I honestly felt like once I got to grips of what things were happening, it came down to basically brain training, which is great. You need to, sometimes with new, fresh mechanics you've never seen before, the thing you need is experience with it. Just see it over and over again to the point where you're very comfortable with it. Certainly by the time we were doing our kill pulls, once we'd reached the latter half of the fight, I was very comfortable with most things going on besides the middle phase. So a little criticisms before that, and there'll be some disagreement on this, is the cutting of the wires. So the lines that go across the room need cutting. And we got stuck on this for way longer than we possibly should. And the reason for that was there's obviously 2 sets of 4 lines, and they're marked 1, 2, 3, 4 with these symbols, and there's red ones and there's orange ones. And the symbols you get to cut them have alternating colors on them as well. So when I see like blue 3 or red 1, my brain is telling me to cut red 1, and that's the only one I can cut that won't blow us up. We then had a couple of pulls where, by accident, multiple of them got cut at the same time. And we were stuck on this for a good couple of hours. We really were, because it was like, this isn't making any sense, because now I'm going into the one that matches my symbol, and it's not working. Why? And in fact, as with a lot of things in FF14, it boils down to actually the solution is way simpler, but the way it was presented, at least for me, and obviously I'm talking from my opinion, and I know a couple of other players in the group felt the same way, it could have been presented in a way that was a little bit more obvious instead of mixing the colors together, because all you have to do is 1, 2, 3, 4. That's it. And some people are going to look at it and not read too much into it and go, yeah, it's 1, 2, 3, 4. Like, it's dead easy. You just have to decide which way you need to cut in order to make the room safe, and then do it that way. But we were stuck on this for a good couple of hours. Like, we were throwing ideas at it. It was like, why is this not working? But we saw something work in a previous phase. Why don't we try this? Maybe we need to do like 2 orange and 2 blue. And we ended up overcomplicating the issue massively compared to what it actually was. But then we got past that, which then led to easily the most difficult moment of the fight, which involves multiple teleporters, multiple cleave towers that need to be baited by proximity while the room's exploding at the same time. The stupid thing about this phase is everybody in my group fully understands how it works. And we fully understood how it worked. And again, we didn't review the VODs, so we were getting to that phase somewhat irregularly at the time, and then trying a new idea, and then sometimes people would be dead, and which makes it a wipe anyway, because if it's proximity based and you need 4 people and there's only 3, then 2 of the towers are going to point at one guy and everybody's going to die. So it was tricky. It was very, very tricky to process, at least for my boomer brain, I've got a teleporter that I have, which is also going to rotate, and there are 2 teleporters that are going to rotate. Then we didn't notice for quite some time, actually, that different towers were indicated as to what was going to go off first. So we have to move away from that one while baiting that, then be in a position where the teleporter will bring us back to a safe spot and do all those things. Despite the fact that everyone in the group knew where it was, and I'm as bad as most people at this. Nearly enough every pull, somebody got it wrong. Like, very few pulls, actually everybody got it correct. You were either not stood in the right position for after the teleporter spins, so it actually drags you instead of taking you somewhere, which is what you need it to do if the bomb was going off in a certain situation, and then flipping back over, things like that. We knew how it worked. We had a strategy. It was fine, but it was inconsistent as all hell. And then on a random pull, we noticed that for some reason, somebody survived who shouldn't have survived. And from there, our wonderful Lionheart worked out, is like, hey, if we kind of do it this way, why don't we try this and then get it twisted around? And then we run to these certain spots that we should be pretty safe. And then we don't have to think about one of the mechanics of the like 5 that are happening at the same time. That makes it easier. And it did. We got definitely more consistent pulls. Not perfect by any means, but more consistent in order to push past that phase. But that phase was a nightmare for me. It's nothing wrong with it, by the way. It's fine. I also now know, after we killed it, people are like, yeah, okay, there's actually a way of doing this where you barely have to think about it at all. You could just stand over here and it'll always work. I was like, oh, shit. Well, it doesn't matter. We kind of did it in our semi-legit way, our second strategy that worked. But that was definitely that was the killer for... I want to say like a third of our pulls was just that phase. Like everybody knowing what they need to do and then realizing there's a sudden realization that occurs during that phase where you're like, oh my God, this is wrong. I'm in the wrong place. And then you just watch in misery as your character blows everybody else up and stuff like that. Moving forward, it was actually pretty fine. We started to YOLO a bit of strats here. I think this is again where we made the mistake with not checking the VODs because I've checked the video back. And the phase that probably we ended up tank limit breaking it just to not deal with it because honestly we knew we were getting close to the end of the fight and it was just not registering with any of us by that point as to what exactly was happening. And now I've looked at the video back since I killed it. It's the first time I've like gone back and checked. It's actually ludicrously easy how that phase works. And if I would have looked at it for more than 2 minutes, we would have never wiped that phase ever. It was so stupidly easy when I looked at it that I felt bad. I was like, oh, okay, this is actually really simple. And I don't know why I didn't see it before, but often the way with FF14 stuff. And then moving on to the last phase, we actually killed it not knowing the final mechanic. We've done this. Imagine if you've done this or you've even player found it. You've probably never done this last phase because you don't need to. We didn't know that. We had no idea that you didn't need to do that because, again, we're going in blind. So we played this phase as it was intended to be played, and it's a little tricky to get it done. But as soon as we killed it, people were like, yeah, you don't even bother doing that last phase. You just nuke the boss and win because you have so long that it doesn't matter. You could just kill the boss. But I'm happy that we did it the right way. There is a little bit of a fucking badge to go with it that we actually killed it the proper way. So overall, loved this. Have no real intention of ever going back. Back. Oh, we were slightly too slow. Son of a bitch. 2%.
Okay, sir.
Res.
Get me up.
I'm up. Oh, it's an AoE. I'm gonna have to dodge this.
It's not. Is it dead?
It's not dead yet. It's not dead. It's
Oh,
fucking
thank
dead,
God.
dude.
It's fucking dead. Let's go.
Oh my God.
Oh shit.
Oh, that was a scruff 2%, dude.
Okay, so after we baited, we should have just run straight across while dodging the cleaves. But
Yes.
aside from that, yeah.
Yeah, bait and charge is what that's the only thing we didn't know. Fucking hell.
If it's east, you always go to inside
The
lane.
Victor. Go with the spoils.
Mouse boy. I need to see it.
No, I mean I can send you the link to.
Thank you, Nanaki. Oh, man.
No, because basically you have.
And that's probably where the issue comes up. And there's been a regular comment that I've seen all over the place is like, yeah, it's cool. Never going back there. So the rewards. And this is where Square Enix needs to be very careful. They need to be very, very careful with this because there aren't great rewards for doing this and even less so for doing the Savage version, which is much harder. There's a mount that you can either get to drop or you can farm this place over and over again to get it. Subjective, as always. I don't think it's a great mount. Some people do. I have no interest in getting that mount. Couldn't care less. I do want to do the Savage, but for bragging rights more than anything. But I'm going to have to upgrade my gear to do it. And other than that, like a title and a bit of a thing that goes on the wall, some cosmetic stuff that goes with it. I imagine this is where the big thought is, because a lot of the feedback I've seen is like, I would really like to get gear from here. Some people are actually looking for this to be an alternative to Savage raiding. Okay, this is where it gets dicey, and obviously World of Warcraft, which is where most of my history is, have dabbled infrequently, sometimes successful, sometimes not, with this idea of lower group content providing similar rewards, if not the same rewards, as the toughest challenge that's in the game, which would be the current raid tier on its Savage difficulty. So let's talk about that a little bit. We can go back as far as the Burning Crusade for this. the original heroic dungeons. This will not be relevant if you played TBC Classic, I don't think, because the knowledge, everybody was kind of min-maxed to hell. And I mean, for instance, like originally in the Burning Crusade of World of Warcraft, the very last raid, the Sunwell, there was only like 450 guilds that did the Sunwell, because it was really, really hard at the time. We were lesser players. We didn't min-max as hard. I think in the TBC Classic version, there's 25,000. It's a different kettle of fish. That's the nature of things. You know, the game might be the same, but it's not being played the same. Let's put it that way. So the original TBC Heroics were extraordinarily difficult and designed for raiders, as much as this is designed for raiders. But it did reward gear, which was only relevant every time they updated it. They kept it relevant via badges. You farmed badges, and they had lockouts involved, so you could only get badges at certain times, and then it had to reset, and then you could do them again. And these badges could go to a vendor and buy gear. I actually think that was probably the best iteration on this. If you're going to make content that is designed for raiders or people who are good enough to be raiders, but can't raid because of commitment things, and you want an alternative gearing path, badges is a good way about it. Especially if you're only going to do one dungeon, because right now we've got one dungeon. I suspect that Squeenix will not make multiple of these and try and match Mythic Plus, or even just... They can't turn their current dungeons into Criterion Dungeons because they just wouldn't work. I imagine they're going to stick with the one dungeon. Badges or some sort of currency that can buy select amounts of decent quality gear, I think is fine. It leaves a little bit of incentive to go and do Savage Raiding if you want to flesh out that set. But if you want to push a bit harder than just badge gear or tombstone gear, whatever the tombstone of the month happens to be, that seems pretty fair to me. You can get some really good items. It's a nice alternative. You're missing a drop from your Savage Raid that you've not managed to get, so you can go and do this and get that. I think that's probably the best iteration I've seen. However, it excludes a dramatic amount of people because of the difficulty. And I know from the thousands of people who watched me do this dungeon, it's like a lot of people just don't want to deal with this level of difficulty at all. And it's arguable that this is much, much harder than, say, a plus 15 Mythic Plus, which rewards you with, you know, the access to a guild vault that'll give you mythic quality gear. So it's a very difficult thing to get right, but I think TBC got it pretty close. Over the last few years, Blizzard has toyed around with the idea of, well, it should be dropped down and make it a little more flexible. Mythic Plus was actually dropped below heroic rating for quite some time. And now for Dragonflight, they're boosting it back up again so you can achieve extremely high quality rewards, but they're going to put the challenge even higher, which would probably make the difficulty somewhere similar to what Criterion is right now. And I'm sure this is the discussion they're going with now, as WoW's been tackling this for the past 10 years and still not managed to get it right, because the difficulty you run into is if you make a really lucrative source of easier to organize content that you can play with very elite players, or you can find people to get you through it, that becomes your only source of playing. So if it's fully rewarded, that's the only source of playing. In and of itself, there's nothing particularly wrong with that. If people just want to do, I just want to play with my 3 friends in FF's case, or my 4 friends in WoW's case, I personally don't have an issue with that. The issue is it tends to diminish the other content, because similar to when WoW tried to do this again, with its 10 and 25 split offering the same rewards, is everybody just ditched 25 men because 10 man is just easier to put together. And if you've got an existing guild or an existing static, you can find those 4 people or 9 people in WoW's case that are really good, and you can have a pretty easy, fun time with those guys, and everybody else kind of gets ditched, and then you create all sorts of other social issues, which FF in particular does not want to create a toxic social environment when it comes to acquiring gear. They absolutely don't want to do that as best as possible. So what is the solution to that? I'm sure that's what they're going on with right now. Personally, I'd be okay with a lockout that gives you an item. Like, even if it was like once a reset, it's like your first reset gets you a decent piece of gear, or similar to the other raids where you can redo it until you get a piece of gear. But it's either one, or you can farm it and get some badges, but it's not like a full set. So there is some encouragement to do that. Even though this is extremely hard, there's no getting away from it. It's very, very hard. I still tend to lean to the camp is like, it shouldn't be the one and only source. And I actually think it would lead to a lot more problems if there was one dungeon that basically provided you everything, and you could get really good at it and just farm it over and over, and then everybody else is just locked out of being able to do it because their friends have already got it and things like that. And if you could spam farm it, then you get really bored of it, and the people would just be asking for more and more and more. Once a week, like an Unreal, is fine. That's fine. I haven't really got an issue with that, and it would incentivize going. As it stands right now, I have no reason to go back and do this, despite the fact that I really enjoyed it. But you're encouraging other people to go along. It's like, well, do you want the mount? Not really. I might do it with some other people who haven't done it, but not really. And ultimately, it is some sort of reward structure that's going to incentivize repeat killing of this. And the pitiful amount of badges, tomestones you get from it is not it. It's not it. Unless you can definitely clear it on Savage very, very quickly, it's still faster to do a hunt train, which requires that's practically no brain power whatsoever. Like, it's just not going to be up in the cards. It definitely needs looking at. I would be very careful about what they do with it, though, so it doesn't lean to this is the only content I want, because that creates a real toxic divide, and we've seen that happen where people are like, well, I don't want to do this, I want to do just this, and you should cater to that, and they kind of put themselves in that position. Maybe it's too hard. For all I know, we talked about this, and the actual participation rate of this thing is ludicrously low. I suspect it's very, very low. I would suspect not many people have gone to the Criterion level. A lot of people done the variant level, where it was nice and easy and fun and gave a mount that was cool and was interesting and not particularly difficult. How many people have gone a step up? I would love to see those metrics, but my guess is it's extraordinarily low in all ways, but that's the way it's going to be. So that's my thoughts on it. Super fun content. Definitely needs something to incentivize going back, or maybe even it's fine as a one-off thing. It might be. It might be fine as it's just a one-off thing. It's really hard. You enjoyed your time there. I certainly did. I enjoyed the journey to killing it, and that's kind of enough. If people are looking for an alternative source of gearing and Squeenix is on board with that, I'd just be careful with how far they go with it, because getting that right is not easy. It's not easy. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I'll see you again. Bye-bye.